What would you do if you discovered that everything you thought you knew about history was a lie? What if the walls around you held secrets that could rewrite textbooks and change the way we understand the past? In the heart of one of Europe's most magnificent palaces, where kings once walked and queens held court, a simple security guard was about to make a discovery that would shake the foundations of what historians believed for centuries. Behind what appeared to be just another ornate wall lay a hidden chamber that had been sealed for over 200 years. What he found inside wasn't gold or jewels, but something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous to those in power. This isn't a story from a movie or a novel. This is real. This happened. And what was discovered behind that wall has been kept from the public for reasons that will become clear as you read on. The guard who made this discovery? He never spoke publicly about it again. The officials who were called to the scene, they signed agreements that still bind them today, but secrets have a way of finding the light, and this one is finally ready to be told. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about power, history, and the lengths to which people will go to protect the truth from being revealed. Are you ready to discover what really happened behind that secret wall? Marcus Rodriguez had been working as a security guard at the Château de Versailles for 12 years when his life changed forever. At 52 years old, he was the kind of man who noticed things others missed. His colleagues often joked that he could hear a tourist drop a coin from 3 rooms away, but Marcus took his job seriously. The palace wasn't just his workplace. It was a living piece of history that he felt honored to protect. It was a cold Tuesday morning in November 2019 when Marcus began his usual patrol of the palace's lesser-known sections. These areas were rarely visited by tourists and only occasionally by researchers with special permits. The morning fog hung low over the palace gardens, creating an almost mystical atmosphere that Marcus had grown to love during his years of service. As he walked through the corridors of the North Wing, something caught his attention. He had passed by this particular wall thousands of times before. But today, something was different. The ornate wallpaper with its intricate gold and burgundy patterns seemed to be peeling slightly near one of the carved moldings. Marcus stopped and examined it more closely. What he initially thought was simply aging wallpaper turned out to be something else entirely. As he gently pressed against the area where the paper was lifting, he felt the wall give slightly under pressure. This was impossible. These walls were solid stone, built to last centuries. Yet, there was definitely some kind of movement. Marcus looked around to ensure he was alone before investigating further. He had always been curious by nature, a trait that had served him well in his security work. Using his fingernails, he carefully peeled back more of the wallpaper. Underneath, instead of the expected stone or plaster, he found wood. Old, dark wood that seemed to be part of some kind of panel system. His heart began to race as he realized what he might be looking at. Hidden panels were not uncommon in palaces of this era. Many rooms had secret passages or hidden compartments used by royalty to move unseen or store valuable items. But this section of the palace had been thoroughly documented and restored multiple times over the centuries. How could something this significant have been missed? Marcus spent the next hour carefully examining the panel. He discovered what appeared to be a small, nearly invisible latch, hidden within the carved molding. It was so well concealed that it looked like nothing more than decorative detail. As he manipulated the latch, he heard a soft click, and suddenly a section of the wall swung inward like a door. Behind the panel was a narrow passageway, barely wide enough for one person. The air that emerged was stale and cold, carrying with it the musty smell of centuries of isolation. Marcus hesitated for a moment. Protocol dictated that he should immediately report this discovery to his supervisors, but his curiosity was overwhelming. He decided to take just a quick look. Using his flashlight, Marcus peered into the darkness. The passageway extended for about 10 feet before opening into what appeared to be a larger space. The walls of the passage were made of the same stone as the rest of the palace, but they were unfinished. Rough-hewn, clearly never intended to be seen by anyone except those who knew of their existence. Marcus squeezed through the narrow opening and made his way down the passage. As he emerged into the larger space, his flashlight beam revealed something that took his breath away. He was standing in a room that was roughly 15 feet by 20 feet, with a vaulted ceiling that rose about 12 feet high. But it wasn't the architecture that stunned him. It was what the room contained. The space was filled with furniture, artwork, and documents that appeared to be from the 18th century. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but remarkably well preserved due to the sealed environment. There were several ornate chairs, a large writing desk, multiple paintings in elaborate frames, and most intriguingly, numerous chests and boxes of various sizes. As Marcus explored the room further, he began to realize the significance of what he had discovered. This wasn't just a storage room that had been forgotten over time. Everything in the room appeared to have been placed there deliberately and systematically. The furniture was arranged as if the room had been in use, and the documents were organized in neat stacks on the desk and in the various containers. One painting in particular caught his attention. It was a portrait of a woman in royal dress, but it wasn't a painting he recognized from any of the palace's official collections. The woman appeared to be from the late 18th century, based on her clothing and hairstyle, but there was something unusual about the way she was depicted. Unlike most royal portraits, which showed their subjects in formal regal poses, this woman appeared to be in a more casual, intimate setting. Marcus carefully examined some of the documents on the desk. While his French was limited, he could make out dates from the 1780s and 1790s, and he recognized some names that he knew from his years of working in the palace. However, there were other names that were completely unfamiliar to him, despite his extensive knowledge of the palace's history. As he continued to explore, Marcus found something that made him stop in his tracks. In one of the wooden chests, carefully wrapped in what appeared to be silk cloth, were several bound volumes that looked like journals or diaries. The leather bindings were in excellent condition, protected by their wrapping and the sealed environment of the room. Marcus carefully opened one of the journals and immediately recognized the style of handwriting as being from the 18th century. While he couldn't read most of the French text, he could see that the entries were dated and appeared to be personal observations or daily records of some kind. What was most intriguing was that many of the entries seemed to be signed with initials rather than full names. The more Marcus explored the room, the more convinced he became that he had stumbled upon something of enormous historical significance. This wasn't just a forgotten storage room. It was a deliberately hidden chamber that contained what appeared to be personal belongings and private documents from the time of the French Revolution. As the reality of his discovery began to sink in, Marcus realized that he was facing a dilemma. His duty as a security guard was to immediately report any unusual findings to his supervisors. However, he also understood that a discovery of this magnitude would likely result in the room being sealed off and potentially restricted from public knowledge, while experts determined its significance. Marcus decided to document what he had found before reporting it. Using his phone, he carefully photographed the room from multiple angles, taking special care to capture images of the paintings, furniture, and documents. He was particularly thorough in photographing the journals and any documents that appeared to contain names or dates. As he worked to document his discovery, Marcus began to piece together what might have happened in this room. Based on the dates he had seen and the general arrangement of the space, it appeared that someone had used this room as a private refuge or meeting place during the turbulent years of the French Revolution. The hidden nature of the room suggested that whoever had used it needed to keep their activities secret, possibly for their own safety. The implications of this discovery were staggering. If this room had indeed been in use during the Revolution, it could contain information that would provide new insights into one of the most studied periods in French history. The personal nature of the items suggested that this might have been a private space used by someone of importance, possibly even members of the royal family themselves. After spending nearly 3 hours documenting the room, Marcus finally made the difficult decision to seal it back up and report his discovery through proper channels. He carefully closed the journals and returned them to their protective wrapping, ensured that everything was positioned exactly as he had found it, and made his way back through the narrow passage. As he closed the hidden panel and smoothed the wallpaper back into place, Marcus couldn't help but feel that his life had just taken a dramatic turn. He had always been fascinated by history, but now he had personally uncovered a piece of it that had been hidden for over 2 centuries. The weight of that responsibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. Marcus returned to his security station and immediately called his supervisor, Michel Dubois, who had been working at the palace for over 20 years. When Marcus explained what he had discovered, there was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Michel's initial reaction was skepticism. After all, The palace had been thoroughly explored and documented countless times over the years. However, Michel knew Marcus well enough to take his claims seriously. Marcus was not the type of person to make up stories or exaggerate situations. If he said he had found something significant, then it was worth investigating. Michel told Marcus to secure the area and wait for him to arrive with additional personnel. Within an hour, Michel arrived with 2 other senior staff members and Dr. Catherine Moreau, one of the palace's chief historians. Marcus led them to the location and demonstrated how to access the hidden panel. The expressions on their faces as they saw the passageway and then the room itself confirmed that Marcus had indeed made an extraordinary discovery. Dr. Moreau was particularly excited about the find. As she examined the room and its contents, she began to form theories about what they might have uncovered. The time period, the secrecy of the location, and the personal nature of the items all pointed to this being connected to the royal family's final years at Versailles before the revolution forced them to leave. The discovery immediately raised numerous questions that would require extensive research to answer. Who had used this room? Why had it been kept secret? What information might the documents and journals contain? And perhaps most importantly, why had this room remained hidden and undiscovered for so long? As word of the discovery spread among the senior staff at the palace, it became clear that this find had the potential to significantly impact historical understanding of the final years of the French monarchy. However, it also raised complex questions about how to handle such a discovery responsibly, both in terms of historical preservation and public disclosure. The day that had started as a routine security patrol had ended with one of the most significant historical discoveries in recent memory. Marcus Rodriguez, a security guard who had always felt a deep connection to the history surrounding him, had literally uncovered a piece of that history that had been waiting over 2 centuries to be found. Within 24 hours of Marcus's discovery, the hidden room had become the center of intense activity. Dr. Catherine Moreau had spent the entire night reviewing the photographs Marcus had taken and consulting with colleagues from universities across France. By morning, she had assembled a team of experts that included historians, conservators, and specialists in 18th-century French documents. The palace administration faced an immediate challenge. A discovery of this magnitude required careful handling, but it also needed to be kept confidential until they could fully understand what they had found. Too much attention too quickly could compromise the investigation and potentially put the artifacts at risk. Dr. Moreau established strict protocols for accessing the room. Only essential personnel were allowed entry, and everyone who entered had to wear protective clothing to prevent contamination of the artifacts. The room was photographed comprehensively from every angle before anything was moved or examined in detail. The first major breakthrough came when Dr. Moreau began examining the journals more closely. Her expertise in 18th-century French handwriting allowed her to decipher much of the text that Marcus had been unable to read. What she found was extraordinary and troubling in equal measure. The journals appeared to be the personal writings of Marie Antoinette herself, but they contained information that contradicted much of what historians thought they knew about the Queen's final years at Versailles. The entries detailed secret meetings, hidden alliances, and desperate attempts to save the monarchy that had never been documented in any other historical source. One entry, dated September 1792, described a plan to smuggle important documents and valuables out of the palace in preparation for what the Queen clearly knew was an inevitable departure. The entry mentioned specific individuals who were helping with this effort, including several names that Dr. Moreau recognized as minor nobles who had supposedly fled France much earlier than previously thought. But it was another discovery that truly shocked the research team. Hidden within one of the wooden chests, carefully wrapped and sealed, were documents that appeared to be correspondence between Marie Antoinette and various European monarchs. These letters suggested that there had been much more extensive planning for foreign intervention in the French Revolution than historians had ever suspected. The implications were staggering. If these documents were authentic, they would rewrite significant portions of revolutionary history. They suggested that the royal family had been far more actively involved in counter-revolutionary activities than previously known, and that several foreign governments had made commitments to support the French monarchy that had never been publicly acknowledged. Dr. Moreau immediately contacted her colleague, Professor Jean-Baptiste Laurent, who was considered one of the world's leading experts on Revolutionary-era documents. Professor Laurent arrived from the Sorbonne within hours of receiving her call, bringing with him specialized equipment for analyzing historical documents. The authentication process was complex and painstaking. Professor Laurent examined the paper, the ink, the handwriting, and even the methods used to bind the journals. Every test supported the conclusion that these documents were indeed from the late 18th century and appeared to be authentic writings of Marie Antoinette and her correspondents. As the experts delved deeper into the contents of the hidden room, they began to piece together a remarkable story. It appeared that in the final months before the royal family was forced to leave Versailles, Marie Antoinette had been secretly documenting everything she could about the revolution, her family's situation, and the various attempts being made to save the monarchy. The hidden room had apparently been her private refuge where she could write freely without fear of discovery. The arrangement of the furniture suggested that she had spent considerable time there, possibly meeting with trusted advisors and planning what would ultimately be unsuccessful attempts to escape the revolutionary forces. One of the most poignant discoveries was a series of letters that Marie Antoinette had written to her children, but apparently never sent. These letters revealed a side of the queen that was rarely seen in historical accounts. Rather than the frivolous, out-of-touch aristocrat often portrayed in histories of the period, these writings showed a woman who was deeply aware of the gravity of her situation and desperately trying to protect her family. In one letter addressed to her daughter, dated just weeks before the family was forced to leave Versailles, Marie Antoinette wrote about her fears for the future and her regrets about decisions that had been made. She expressed hope that her children would one day understand the impossible position in which the royal family had found themselves. The discovery also included several paintings and personal items that provided new insights into the queen's private life. Among these was a small portrait that appeared to be of a child who was not among the queen's known offspring. The painting was unsigned and undated, but its presence among such personal items suggested it held special significance for the queen. Moreau's team also found evidence that the room had been used by others besides Marie Antoinette. Some of the handwriting in the documents belonged to different individuals, and there were personal items that appeared to belong to men as well as women. This suggested that the hidden room had served as a meeting place for a small group of people who were working together on some kind of secret project. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Why had these items been left in the hidden room instead of being taken when the royal family fled? Had Marie Antoinette intended to return for them, or had she deliberately left them behind, knowing that they might one day provide a more complete picture of what had really happened during those crucial months? The palace administration faced growing pressure to make the discovery public. News of the intensive activity in the North Wing had begun to circulate among the staff, and there were rumors spreading about a significant find. However, the experts advised caution. The documents needed more time for proper analysis, and premature disclosure could lead to misinterpretation or sensationalism. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself in an unusual position. As the discoverer of the room, he was being consulted regularly by the research team. His detailed knowledge of the palace's layout and his careful documentation of the initial discovery had proven invaluable to the investigation. However, Marcus was also struggling with the magnitude of what he had uncovered. He had signed confidentiality agreements that prevented him from discussing the discovery with anyone outside the immediate research team, including his own family. The weight of keeping such a significant secret was taking an emotional toll. Moreau recognized Marcus's situation and made sure he was included in the research process as much as possible. She arranged for him to receive additional training in historical preservation techniques and invited him to participate in some of the less sensitive aspects of the document analysis. As weeks passed, the research team made additional discoveries that added to the complexity of their find. Hidden within the binding of one of the journals, they found a small key. After careful examination of the room, they discovered that the key opened a tiny compartment built into the writing desk. Inside this compartment were several pieces of jewelry and a small scroll containing what appeared to be a list of names and locations. The scroll proved to be particularly intriguing because many of the names on it were people who had supposedly died during the early years of the revolution. If the list was accurate, it suggested that some individuals had faked their deaths and successfully escaped France, living under assumed identities in other countries. This discovery led to a new line of investigation. Researchers began examining historical records from various European countries, looking for evidence of French refugees who had arrived during the revolutionary period. What they found supported the possibility that the list was genuine, and that there had been a much more extensive network helping French aristocrats escape than previously known. The investigation also revealed that the hidden room was part of a larger network of secret passages and concealed spaces throughout the palace. Using ground-penetrating radar and other modern detection techniques, researchers identified several other areas that appeared to contain hidden chambers. However, these other spaces seemed to be empty or accessible only through passages that had been permanently sealed. As the research progressed, it became clear that the discovery was going to require years of study to fully understand it. The documents alone contained enough material to keep historians busy for decades. Each journal entry, letter, and note provided new details about life at Versailles during one of the most turbulent periods in French history. The authentication process had confirmed that the materials were genuine, but this created new challenges. The information contained in the documents challenged many established historical narratives about the revolution and the royal family's role in it. Publishing this information would require careful consideration of its impact on historical scholarship and public understanding of this crucial period. Moreau and her team were also grappling with ethical questions about the discovery. The documents were clearly private writings that were never intended for public consumption. Marie Antoinette had hidden them away, possibly hoping they would remain secret forever. Did modern historians have the right to make these personal thoughts and feelings public knowledge? The palace administration was under increasing pressure from government officials, academic institutions, and the media to make some kind of public announcement about the discovery. However, they were committed to ensuring that any disclosure was done responsibly and with proper context. As the second month of investigation drew to a close, Dr. Moreau prepared a preliminary report on the findings for the palace's board of directors. The report outlined the significance of the discovery, the authentication process that had been completed, and recommendations for how to proceed with further research and eventual public disclosure. The report confirmed what many on the team had suspected from the beginning. The hidden room at Versailles represented one of the most significant historical discoveries of the 21st century. It had the potential to fundamentally change how historians and the public understood the French Revolution and the people who lived through it. However, the report also emphasized the need for continued secrecy while the research was ongoing. Premature disclosure could lead to misinformation, political manipulation of the findings, or attempts by various groups to claim ownership of the materials for their own purposes. As Marcus completed his shift that evening and looked back at the wall that had started this incredible journey, he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the palace might still be hiding. His discovery had opened a window into the past, but it had also raised the possibility that there were many more windows yet to be opened. 6 months after Marcus's discovery, the investigation had evolved into something far more complex and sensitive than anyone had initially anticipated. What had begun as the authentication of historical documents had become an international diplomatic situation involving multiple governments, academic institutions, and powerful families whose ancestors were mentioned in Marie Antoinette's hidden writings. Dr. Moreau found herself at the center of a storm she had never expected. The preliminary findings from the hidden chamber had been shared with select government officials, who immediately recognized the potential political implications of the discovery. Some of the documents suggested that certain European royal families had made commitments during the French Revolution that they had never publicly acknowledged. The French government had quietly reached out to several other nations whose historical narratives might be affected by the documents. These conversations were delicate, as no one wanted to cause diplomatic incidents over events that had occurred over 2 centuries ago. However, the information in Marie Antoinette's papers was detailed enough that it could potentially embarrass current royal families or call into question official historical accounts that had been taught in schools for generations. Meanwhile, the research team had made additional discoveries that complicated the situation even further. Professor Laurent's analysis of the mysterious list of names found in the hidden compartment had led to the identification of several previously unknown escape networks that had operated during the Revolution. Some of these networks appeared to have been funded by foreign governments, which raised questions about the extent of international involvement in French affairs during this period. The most shocking discovery came when researchers began investigating one particular name on the list: Philippe Auguste de Montmorency, a minor noble who was supposed to have been executed in 1793. According to the documents found in the hidden room, de Montmorency had not only escaped execution, but had been secretly relocated to England, where he lived under an assumed name and started a family. This revelation led to a genealogical investigation that traced de Montmorency's descendants to the present day. What the researchers found was extraordinary. Several prominent British families, including one with current members in the House of Lords, were apparently descended from this French aristocrat who had supposedly died during the Revolution. When the research team attempted to contact these families to inform them of their findings, they encountered unexpected resistance. Some family members refused to believe the evidence, while others seemed genuinely disturbed by the implications of their French aristocratic heritage. One family went so far as to hire their own historians to dispute the findings, arguing that the documents must be forgeries. This reaction highlighted another challenge facing the research team. The discovery wasn't just about historical accuracy. It had real implications for real people in the present day. The information in the hidden room could affect inheritance rights, family reputations, and even political careers. Marcus, who had continued to be involved in the investigation as a consultant, found himself increasingly concerned about the direction the research was taking. What had started as an exciting historical discovery was becoming a source of conflict and controversy. He began to question whether his decision to investigate the hidden panel had been the right one. Moreau shared Marcus's concerns but felt a professional obligation to pursue the truth wherever it led. She had spent her entire career studying this period of history, and the documents from the hidden room provided insights that were simply too valuable to ignore. However, she was also becoming aware that powerful forces were beginning to align against the public release of the findings. The pressure came from multiple directions. Government officials expressed concerns about diplomatic implications. Academic institutions worried about the impact on established historical narratives. Even some of Dr. Moreau's colleagues began to suggest that perhaps it would be better to keep the discovery confidential, at least for the time being. The situation became even more complicated when international media began to pick up rumors about the discovery. Despite the confidentiality agreements that everyone involved had signed, word was leaking out that something significant had been found at Versailles. Journalists were making inquiries, and some were offering substantial sums of money for information about what had been discovered. The palace administration found itself in an increasingly difficult position. They were committed to preserving and studying the artifacts that had been found, but they were also responsible for maintaining the reputation and security of the palace. The growing media attention was making it harder to continue the research in secret, but premature disclosure could lead to chaos. Dr. Moreau decided to accelerate the research timeline in hopes of being able to make a controlled public announcement before the story leaked in an uncontrolled way. She assembled a larger team of experts and began working around the clock to analyze as much of the material as possible. This intensified effort led to yet another significant discovery. Hidden within the pages of one of Marie Antoinette's journals, researchers found pressed flowers that had been carefully preserved between the pages. Analysis of these flowers revealed that they were from species that were not native to France, suggesting that they had been gifts from foreign correspondents or souvenirs from travels that had never been documented in official records. More importantly, some of the flowers were from plants that were known to have specific symbolic meanings in 18th century flower language. The combination of flowers suggested a coded message that could only be understood by someone familiar with these symbolic meanings. When decoded, the message appeared to be instructions for a planned escape route that included specific landmarks and safe houses. This discovery led to a fascinating new line of research. Historians began examining the actual locations mentioned in the coded flower message to see if there was any physical evidence of their use as safe houses during the Revolution. What they found was remarkable. Several of these locations still existed, and some contained hidden compartments or other evidence that supported their use as part of an escape network. The flower code discovery also provided new context for understanding some of the other documents in the collection. What had initially appeared to be casual correspondence between Marie Antoinette and various nobles now revealed itself as part of a sophisticated communication system that used multiple layers of coding and symbolism to convey sensitive information. As the research team delved deeper into this communication system, they realized that they had uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that was far more extensive and well-organized than any previously known plot to save the French monarchy. The hidden room at Versailles appeared to have been just one part of a network that stretched across Europe and involved dozens of conspirators. This revelation raised new questions about why the conspiracy had ultimately failed. If it was as well organized and well funded as the documents suggested, what had gone wrong? The answer appeared to lie in some of the final entries in Marie Antoinette's journals, which described betrayals within the conspiracy itself. According to these entries, the conspiracy was discovered and thwarted not by revolutionary forces, but by double agents who were working within the network while secretly supporting the revolution. The Queen's final entries expressed her realization that people she had trusted completely had been working against her all along. This information provided new insights into the complexity of the revolutionary period and the difficulty of determining who could be trusted during such turbulent times. It also explained why so many escape attempts had failed and why the royal family ultimately found themselves trapped at Versailles with increasingly limited options. The research team was now faced with a collection of materials that told a story far more complex and dramatic than anything that had been previously known about this period. However, they were also dealing with increasing pressure to make their findings public before someone else leaked incomplete or inaccurate information about the discovery. Dr. Moreau made the difficult decision to prepare a preliminary public announcement about the discovery. Working with the palace administration and government officials, she developed a plan to reveal the existence of the hidden room and some of the general findings without immediately releasing the most sensitive details about specific individuals or families. The announcement was scheduled for a carefully orchestrated press conference that would allow for controlled disclosure of the information. However, just days before the scheduled announcement, the research team faced a crisis that threatened to derail everything they had worked toward. Marcus received a phone call at home from an unknown individual who claimed to know about his discovery and demanded money in exchange for keeping the information secret. The caller implied that they had inside information about the research and threatened to release distorted versions of the findings if their demands were not met. This extortion attempt highlighted the vulnerability of the situation. Despite all the precautions that had been taken to keep the research confidential, the information had somehow reached people who were willing to use it for their own purposes. Marcus immediately reported the call to Dr. Moreau and palace security. But the incident raised serious concerns about who else might have access to sensitive information about the discovery. The security investigation revealed that several people with access to the research had received similar calls, suggesting that there was an organized effort to exploit the discovery for financial gain. This development forced the research team to accelerate their timeline even further and implement additional security measures to protect both the artifacts and the people involved in the research. As the situation became increasingly complicated, Marcus began to reflect on the chain of events that his curiosity about a loose piece of wallpaper had set in motion. What had seemed like a simple discovery had become a complex web of historical, political, and personal implications that affected people across multiple countries and centuries. The hidden room at Versailles had indeed contained secrets that challenged conventional understanding of history. However, it had also revealed that some secrets remain hidden for good reasons, and that uncovering the truth can sometimes create more problems than it solves. As the research team prepared for their public announcement, they knew they were about to change how the world understood one of history's most studied periods, but they also knew they were opening a door that could never be closed again. The press conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in June 2020, exactly 7 months after Marcus had first discovered the loose wallpaper. However, the world had changed dramatically during those months. The global pandemic had shifted public attention away from historical discoveries, and the research team had used this time to conduct even more thorough analysis of their findings. Moreau stood before a small group of carefully selected journalists, historians, and government representatives. Due to pandemic restrictions, most attendees were participating virtually, which actually served the team's purposes well by allowing them to maintain better control over the information being released. The announcement began with a straightforward description of the discovery process, crediting Marcus for his observational skills and dedication to his duties. Moreau then presented a carefully curated selection of findings that revealed the existence of the hidden room and some of the materials it contained, without delving into the most sensitive political implications. The initial public reaction was exactly what the team had hoped for: intense interest from historians and the general public, but without the kind of sensationalism that could have complicated the ongoing research. Major newspapers around the world covered the story, describing it as one of the most significant historical discoveries of the 21st century. However, the controlled release of information didn't prevent complications from arising. Within days of the announcement, the research team began receiving requests from dozens of academic institutions, government agencies, and private individuals who claimed connections to the people mentioned in the documents. Some wanted access to the materials for research purposes, others demanded copies of documents they claimed were rightfully theirs, and a few threatened legal action if certain information was made public. The most persistent requests came from genealogical researchers and families who believed their ancestors might be mentioned in Marie Antoinette's writings. The palace administration found itself dealing with claims from people across Europe and North America, many of whom provided detailed family histories as evidence of their connections to French aristocracy. One particularly complex case involved a businessman from Switzerland who claimed to be descended from one of the nobles mentioned in the Escape Network documents. He hired a team of lawyers and genealogists who presented compelling evidence supporting his claim. More importantly, he argued that some of the documents contained information about family property that had been confiscated during the Revolution and could still be legally significant under current European property laws. Dr. Moreau and her team found themselves caught between their commitment to historical accuracy and the legal and political implications of their research. They had expected their discovery to be academically significant, but they hadn't anticipated that it would have practical consequences for people living in the present day. The situation became even more complicated when representatives from several European royal families quietly requested private meetings to discuss the findings. These meetings were conducted in strict confidentiality, but it became clear that some very powerful people were concerned about what the documents might reveal about their ancestors' activities during the Revolution. One particularly sensitive issue involved documents suggesting that certain British nobles had provided financial support to French counter-revolutionary activities. This information could potentially embarrass the British royal family and complicate diplomatic relationships between Britain and France. Government officials from both countries requested that this information be withheld from public release, at least until they could assess its implications. Marcus found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As the discoverer of the room, he was frequently contacted by journalists seeking interviews and background information. However, his confidentiality agreements prevented him from discussing most of what had been found. The attention was flattering but also stressful, especially when some reporters began investigating his personal background and family history. The pressure intensified when Marcus received another threatening phone call, this time from someone claiming to represent certain interested parties who wanted the research stopped entirely. The caller implied that continuing the investigation could have serious consequences for everyone involved. This threat was reported to authorities, but it highlighted the fact that the discovery had attracted attention from people with potentially dangerous motivations. Despite these challenges, the research continued. Dr. Moreau's expanded team had made additional discoveries that added even more complexity to their understanding of the revolutionary period. They found evidence of a sophisticated intelligence network that had operated throughout Europe, gathering information about revolutionary activities and coordinating efforts to support counter-revolutionary movements. The intelligence network appeared to have been funded by a coalition of European monarchies who were concerned about the spread of revolutionary ideas to their own countries. The documents suggested that this network continued operating long after the French Revolution ended, eventually evolving into some of the intelligence services that played important roles in later European conflicts. This discovery had immediate relevance to modern intelligence agencies, several of which quietly approached the research team seeking access to the documents. They were particularly interested in the organizational methods and communication techniques described in the materials, some of which were surprisingly sophisticated for their time period. The ongoing analysis also revealed that Marie Antoinette had been far more politically astute than most historical accounts suggested. Her private writings showed a clear understanding of the political forces at work during the Revolution, and demonstrated strategic thinking about how to respond to various threats. This contradicted the popular image of her as a frivolous and out-of-touch queen. One of the most poignant discoveries was a series of letters that Marie Antoinette had written to her mother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, but had never sent. These letters revealed the queen's deep sense of isolation and her struggle to balance her loyalty to France with her Austrian heritage. They provided intimate insights into the personal cost of being caught between two countries during a period of international tension. The research team also found evidence that Marie Antoinette had been secretly negotiating with moderate revolutionary leaders in an attempt to find a compromise that would preserve the monarchy in some form. These negotiations had apparently come closer to success than anyone had previously known, failing ultimately because of pressure from more radical elements on both sides. As the first anniversary of Marcus's discovery approached, Dr. Packerstein Moreau prepared a comprehensive report on the team's findings. The report would be published in multiple academic journals and would provide the first complete account of what had been found in the hidden room. However, certain sensitive information would continue to be withheld pending resolution of the various legal and political issues that had arisen. The report confirmed that the discovery had fundamentally changed historians' understanding of the French Revolution and its aftermath. It had revealed the existence of networks and relationships that had never been suspected, and had provided new insights into the motivations and strategies of key figures from the period. However, the report also acknowledged the challenges that had arisen from the discovery. The intersection of historical research with contemporary legal, political, and personal interests had created complications that the academic community was still learning to navigate. The case had become a model for how such discoveries should be handled in the future. Marcus was prominently acknowledged in the report as the person whose observational skills and curiosity had made the entire discovery possible. He was invited to contribute a personal account of the discovery process, which became one of the most widely read portions of the academic publication. Looking back on the year since his discovery, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He had gone from being a relatively unknown security guard to being internationally recognized as the discoverer of one of history's most significant archaeological finds. The experience had been exciting, stressful, rewarding, and sometimes frightening. The discovery had also changed Marcus personally. His involvement in the research process had deepened his appreciation for history and given him confidence in his own analytical abilities. The palace administration had promoted him to a new position as special historical consultant, recognizing that his unique combination of security knowledge and historical interest made him valuable for future discoveries. The hidden room itself had been carefully preserved and was being prepared for eventual public viewing. However, access would be strictly limited to small groups of visitors who could appreciate the historical significance of the space without damaging its delicate artifacts. The room would serve as both a museum exhibit and a continuing research facility. Moreau had been appointed to head a new international research consortium dedicated to studying the materials found in the hidden room. The consortium included historians from multiple countries and had received funding from several governments and private foundations. The research was expected to continue for at least another decade, as there were still many documents that had not been fully analyzed. The discovery had also inspired new searches for similar hidden spaces in other historical buildings throughout Europe. Several palaces, castles, and manor houses had begun conducting systematic surveys using modern detection technology, and a few additional discoveries had already been made. None were as significant as the Versailles find, but they confirmed that there were likely many more historical secrets waiting to be uncovered. As Marcus completed his shift and walked past the location where he had first noticed the loose wallpaper, he often thought about the chain of events that small observation had initiated. The discovery had brought him recognition and opportunities he had never imagined, but it had also taught him about the complexity of truth and the responsibility that comes with uncovering secrets that have been hidden for centuries. The hidden room at Versailles had revealed that history was far more complex and nuanced than textbooks suggested. It had shown that people in the past faced impossible choices and moral dilemmas that couldn't be easily judged by contemporary standards. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that there were still mysteries waiting to be discovered by anyone curious and observant enough to notice when something didn't look quite right. The story of Marcus's discovery would eventually become part of the history of Versailles itself, inspiring future generations of visitors to look more carefully at their surroundings and to remember that the past is never as settled or completely understood as it might appear. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected places, made by the most unlikely people, at moments when curiosity overcomes caution and leads to extraordinary revelations that change how we understand the world.